Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This week, my guest is Lori Van Dusen, and she is the founder of LVW Advisors. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Gary.
So, Lori, tell us about your journey, before you started LVW Advisors.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll make it brief. I started in the wirehouse industry. For those listeners that don't know what that is, that's the big bank brokerage firms. I was hired by Lehman Brothers, but went to the Shearson side. And Shearson Lehman Brothers, I started in the World Trade Center in the South Tower. That's where I worked. And that's where the training program was. And that company became Morgan Stanley. So I never went anywhere. I just had a lot of different business cards from mergers and acquisitions. Right. And right before the Morgan Stanley merger with Smith Barney, I left and formed my own company. There were a couple steps in between there, but ultimately I formed my own company because I felt that I was always a fiduciary. I felt that I wanted to be a named fiduciary, that I was tired of fighting conflicts of interest in finance. I had built a pretty significant almost $6 billion practice, a lot of advisory to business owners and also institutions, a lot of institutional money like colleges, universities. And I just was tired of fighting the battles that I had to fight. So I really wanted to form my own company. I thought that the industry was going towards independence. I didn't know that I would be a pioneer, which is kind of a theme throughout my life. Like, I just didn't know. I wouldn't say like, oh, well, you were so brilliant that you figured this out. I just did it. And then people are like, oh, you were ahead of the curve. And I always say the same thing. Right. Being a pioneer, most pioneers are shot and killed. So it's not the best. You go through a lot to be a first mover, and it feels like you're wrong, really, until a certain point in time. So being early is like being wrong. But anyway, that's kind of my background. We now focus more on giving advice to families, business owners, multi-generational wealth, a lot of first generation. I'm a first generation business person. I was raised by a small business owner, entrepreneur. So I kind of, I think about things that way. I think about going from a practice, which I had, granted it was a big one, but moving to a business, which is what I wanted to do, and an enterprise, which is really like, can it outlive you? Can it work without your presence as a founder?
Right. What is it about the financial arena that is what excites you? What is it that really gets you going? Because I think, many times people, like you're saying, hey, I was a pioneer in this, and it's like, I know I didn't want to do this anymore. I wanted to do that. But what is it that really gets you revved up and really wants you want to get out and help people?
It's probably a little different now than it was, but because I'm older and I'm not, this young person who was starting out and, building this business. And now I have the, pleasure of working with young entrepreneurs, business owners, a lot of different ages, and have built this multi-generational team that allows me to kind of stay in the things that I love to do and I think I'm best at. I'm terrible at operations, technology, process. That is not where I should be.
Right.
So I would say what gets me jazzed up is I'm doing what I love, which is mentoring, sharing kind of some of my war stories and my experiences with business owners and helping them navigate family challenges and all the things that come with having a business, having a life. They don't live in parallel universes. And, I think I'm kind of equipped to do that, to just not only talk about money and talk about, financial success or independence or how to sell a business or whatever it is. Those are just things or steps. All these things live within a universe of somebody's life. So I think I'm kind of uniquely qualified in certain ways to talk with people about that.
I think that, many times us as professionals, everybody says it's like, oh, it's almost like you're a psychologist. It's like in lots of ways we are, and that we try to help, talk our clients off the cliff, and things that they're doing or decisions that they're trying to make.
Right.
In your experience and working with business owners, what is the number one mistake that you see that they're making, when it comes to investing and planning for the future and retirement?
So you mean from a business standpoint or investing standpoint?
Both.
Okay. From a business standpoint, depending on the stage of the business, I think a few things. And I speak from my own experience, like as a working mom, early on being a Wall Street person, having little kids, balancing things, I would say a couple things. One, saying and believing that you don't have enough time to take care of yourself, because you have a family and you have this business and you're the business owner, and that's just a fallacy. Because if you don't take care of your own well-being, your mental, spiritual, physical health, everything else ultimately caves in. Ultimately, you may be able to run with that for a while, but you hit a brick wall. So I would say, necessity is the mother of invention, no pun intended. But being a mom, I had to figure out how to mentor people, give away pieces of the business, meaning cash flow, train people to do things without me, so that I could, be present with my family. And more importantly, honestly, to me, was to take care of myself first so that I could be a good mom, a good wife, all the things that I had to navigate, and then a good business person. So I think that's a mistake. And in my industry, it's still super male dominated in finance. And I think that, it's still like that. Like, people don't take care of themselves the way they should. And it does come back to bite you. So I think that that's one, big mistake that people make, in terms of, and also like investing in the business early, investing in people, platform, process early before you're at whatever goal you want to be at. Because when you get there, it's a mad scramble to try to find the right people and coach them around. I guess the third thing would be, the most important thing in business to me, having made mistakes around this and knowing it now, is really understanding your own value set and what's important to you, and hiring to that and training to that. Because that's what ultimately differentiates you, your integrity, how you approach problem solving, how you interact with clients. That's one of my, big things that I've learned the hard way, that if you do a merger or an acquisition with someone or a team of people or a business, and they don't align with you and you haven't figured out what you're all about, you will make a mistake. Most of these transactions fail. And they fail around culture. They fail around the people not being aligned. And then I just think from an investment standpoint, I think just really understanding timeline, risk, cash flow needs, just marrying all those things, and really understanding, the mistakes people make are more, I guess I would say, around not matching up timelines. So saying that you're really aggressive, but yet you have a short-term time horizon, is really like, look at the markets now. That's a bad place to be in. You never want to be a forced seller of anything. You want to be in a position of playing offense. So it's really doing a deep dive around what that means, what the cash flow considerations are, what your liabilities are. Stress testing that is super important, because you never want something that you think is a long-term asset to become a short-term one.
Right.
So,
Right. You know, you talk about multi-generational, businesses and things like that. What do you see is, one of the big problems or mistakes that they're making? Because I know that when I've talked with some of them from the tax side of it and business side, many times the younger generation doesn't exactly line up with, mom and dad or grandparents, whoever it was that kind of did this. So there seems to be some issues, along there. Uh,
mhm.
and it takes a while to get that to get everybody aligned, or at least aligned enough to keep this going in the right direction. Um, I've talked with others that are saying that it's like, okay, I don't want to give this business to my kids for various different reasons. They wanted to, they would love for the business to continue, but they look at it that it's like, okay, if I give this to my kids, they haven't earned it. Have
Hmm.
you run into this much?
Yes. I think there's a lot of different situations around family businesses and succession planning. And sometimes the best succession plan is not to bring in the children, probably the majority of the time, in my experience. But when that's the desire of a founder, you have to be really careful to, I think, hold the child or children accountable, but also understand we're dealing with a situation now where um, the the second generation is really capable, and the founder just isn't seeing it and not giving um, that person enough latitude. And I think, you need to know when to do that and how to hold children accountable in the business, but then know when they've grown and you can kind of step aside. And I think that's super hard for founders to step aside and let anybody take over. I think that's just pervasive. But when there's family dynamics, it's super complicated. And I think I've navigated a lot of this. I think sometimes, figuring out a way you can sell the business to your children in a favorable way. If you're looking at estate planning, which I'm sure you have a lot of experience in estate and tax planning, there are creative ways to do this where everybody feels like it's fair and you're adequately compensating your child for all the years of work they've done in the business, but you're also not giving it away, and you're going to give it away anyway.
Right.
So it's like navigating all these psychodynamics is super important for, advisors, people in our side of the business to understand and really get to the heart of, well, why haven't you given this person more responsibility, or what are you most frustrated with, or what are you worried about, or, and really digging into it. A lot of times, like I said, it's not a succession plan that makes the most sense, may not be children in the business, but there's a lot of dynamics to unpack around it.
Yeah. And I mean, especially if you have multiple children, because lots of times each one of them are going to look at things a little bit differently. I always say that, I've been brought into businesses that have, 5, 6, 7 different partners and up. And the problem is always been, it's like, okay, how do you get all of them to, kind of, row the boat all in the same direction, because each one of them have their independent lives that they want to do different things. So that always is another dynamic that is difficult when dealing with businesses that aren't, sole owners.
Yeah, it's super complicated. I think, our background, starting really almost super early on with multiple decision makers and institutions and having to drive consensus, is not that different. It's just more emotional. But
Right.
boardrooms can be really emotional too, and it's just figuring out, like, assessing different skill sets, how people in the family approach things, the dynamics, and trying to get them to agree to disagree on things and move on. It's just the objective third party, the quarterback, the advisor, is super important in these kinds of situations. And if I were a potential, like somebody looking for an advisor, I would want to make sure that the person has experience in that, if those are the dynamics and there are children in the business, and if there are more than one, if there's more than one child in the business, it's super complicated. So
You talk about that, if you were in their situation looking for an advisor, which you do, what other advice would you have for people that are out there looking for possibly that new advisor, or, possibly their first advisor?
well, I think it depends. If it's their first advisor and there's not, you want to make sure that the person approaches you and where you're at, not where they're at.
Mhm.
And I think, there's the financial advisory, there can be a lot of complications, a lot of jargon. I think it's super important, whomever the person is, that they approach the client or potential client with an educational approach. Like, just figure out where they're at. It's been, I use this acronym called SPIN, which is not mine. It's a long ago acronym that Xerox came up with when they trained salespeople. And it's really powerful, because if an advisor first assesses the situation, understands the unique problems, the implications of the problems, and meets the needs, that's the right person for you. If they can do all those things, and as people become more successful, they have children, a lot of times they outgrow the advisor they originally hired. So needs change. You really have to assess, like, what is it that I really want? A lot of people that we interact with that have businesses or pre or post sale, they want somebody that can help them be objective and navigate through whether or not they should sell a business, how to deal with the things you just talked about around the children in the business. Like, not all advisors are equal. So it's really asking questions around the kinds of things that you need to solve for. It's probably the most important thing. And I think having a multi-generational team is super important in financial advisory, because ultimately, if you're successful with the client, you're not just dealing with one person or two people. And there are staggering statistics in our business about when wealth transfers, what happens. And there's a great wealth transfer going on to women right now. And a lot of that is, men don't outlive wives, and that's part of it. Part of it is women's financial independence. So what we find out when wealth transfers, whether it's to a spouse or to children, it rarely, if ever, stays with the existing advisor. And I think a way to solve for that is to really have, in our case, our team is involved with the family. And so when you're involved with the family, that's if there's marriage, both spouses, children, and you meet them at different places. And that's also, if you think about it, it's good business, but it's also good stewardship, because it's also teaching children how to handle money, philanthropy, all those things. So I think you got to really assess who you're working with and what your needs are if you're looking for an advisor. What kind of clients do they have? What do they do?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what I was just hearing you say is that we really build relationships with our clients that are going to be long-term relationships, because they are multi-generational, as compared to a lot of people who are out there that are more transactional, and they're just looking more what's good for them, not necessarily what's good for the client.
Well, that's a long ago, frustration of mine. It's why I left the wirehouses. And, people don't really understand this that haven't been doing this as long. But it used to be, everybody was just selling something. There was no financial planning when I started. And I was doing financial planning and investing, and people thought I was crazy. They were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, well, I need to understand the whole picture. I need to understand what their relationship is with their children. I need to understand what else they own, what they're worried about, what the past experiences have been. Are there any estate plans in place? What do they want to do? And people would really question, like, you're really spending all that time, you're not getting paid to do that. And I'd be like, well, how do I make a recommendation if I don't understand that? So I think that's still weirdly kind of like, it's a weird thing that still that is more unusual to put in that amount of time up front before being hired by a client. And that's kind of our process, by the way. We don't charge to do financial planning or that discovery and really understanding, because we need to know, are we a good fit for the client and vice versa. So you can't solve a problem unless you know what the problem is. So I think that is kind of our approach.
I think something you just said there is important, because I know that we do this here is, we want to get to know the potential client before, we have any agreements or do anything, because, it's not just them. Okay, do they want to work with us, but do we want to work with them? Do their values and things that they're looking for, do they align with ours and our business? Because if it doesn't, then we're not doing, either one of us aren't doing each other a service. So we need to look at that.
Yeah, it's true. That's
Yeah.
true. You can create, one client that doesn't align, or, you aren't the proper fit for, vice versa. It's pretty disruptive.
hmm Yeah, and there's there's that trust that everybody has to have, and at the beginning, yes, we can talk about all of our accolades and everything else that we have, but we're asking them to take faith in us and what
Hmm.
we do, and then yes, over time, we're going to be able to reassure them and show them that everything we've been saying is, we can help that come to fruition. But I think so much of it is having that dialogue with people, and I'm gonna say not disappearing. I mean, with the way the market is right now and stuff like that, I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls and people asking questions and wanting to know what to do and things like that, where, I heard horror stories 2008, and then even in 2022, after COVID and everything, that people weren't able to get a hold of their advisor because the advisors were hiding from them because the market wasn't doing so well.
Yeah. Yeah, we that would that would not be the case. Yeah, I think you have to be proactive in markets like this. And this is market is not over in terms of the downside. So, I have no way of assessing whether it's going to turn into a bear market or not, but I've been through a number of them, and this feels like a corrective phase. Will it be a bear market? I don't think anybody knows.
Right.
Will we have an earnings recession? Nobody knows. But I think you have to be on the phone, proactively talking, preparing people, and stress testing portfolios, and kind of saying, look, if we have another 15% down, this is what would happen in your portfolio. Just testing, do you have enough liquidity? Again, it gets back to really understanding risk tolerance. And in times like these, they're in some ways they're great times, because they do prove diversifying the right way can help a lot. And I think people have kind of forgotten that over the last few years. I think we're in the post-stimulus era, where we were in the,
Right.
stimulus era, where, the markets would recover quickly. I don't think we're in that kind of period anymore. So good financial advice and proactive, reaching out to clients is super important.
Yeah, I think that, you talked earlier about, that you put together plans, you do this stuff even before anybody else was doing it. And I just always look at it that if I have a plan, I know what's supposed to happen. And when markets change or tax laws change or stuff like that, I'm able to change the plan and be able
Right.
to make corrective actions for the client. Where if we don't have a plan, then we're being totally reactive. And that's
Right.
not a good way to be.
Yeah, about a week and a half ago, we sent out to our entire client base. I think we also posted this. There's a blog out there, but the kind of stock market correction playbook. Like, here's what we do. Just so you know, here are the actions we would take if this happens, if that happens. So that's just one way of communicating there. But you really do have to talk with people live. There's people are nervous, I think, right now, because it's been a quick corrective phase. It's happened really fast from, January. Everybody was like, oh yeah, rah, rah, the markets are going to be great, to now worry about tariffs, worrying about more of the geopolitical stuff, which was on the table then too. But I think, markets, it's a good reminder that things can change quickly.
I totally agree with that. I didn't want to skip over your book. Talk to us about your book a little bit.
Well, I wrote a book, and I guess I would say I started journaling, or I'd be out on a run and something would come to me and I do, a voice memo. But I had a very traumatic loss of my husband super suddenly, young, out of, not, we were married for 30 years, but not something that you would ever anticipate. And in the recovery or trying to get my feet back on the ground, which was not easy, I had a therapist. I'd never been in therapy before, but I'd highly recommend it. Who said, why don't you start just journaling your thoughts down? Because, when someone dies that suddenly and unexpectedly, there is this PTSD. It's a real thing that occurs. And so that's what I was doing. And I'm a long distance runner. I deal with stress my entire life. I was talking about, taking care of yourself. I've always done that, but I just go outside. Being outside and just walking, running, doing whatever, and things just come to me in this kind of meditative place that you can get to when you're a runner. And I would just write, or I'd wake up in the morning and kind of just dump things into a journal. And after a while, I kind of looked at all this stuff after 2 years and just heard this voice, and I say it wasn't mine. This is a book. I'm like, wow, this is a book. And so I had my younger son work with me in editing, gave it to my older son, hired a professional editor, a legal team, and it shaped itself into a book that I probably once it was done, it had about a 30% chance of being published. Like I was not totally comfortable with publishing it. And then I gave it to 5 people who weren't related as beta readers. And they all said the same thing. My son said, we think this book is going to help a lot of people. It's not a finance book. It's not a business book. It has a lot of business stories in it, but it's a book about life. It's kind of like what I was alluding to earlier. Like people's lives, life is complicated. Things happen that you never anticipate. And how do you navigate those? And how do you kind of move forward from losses or failures? And I've had a lot of business failures, things that have happened, it's not a straight line. So I just got to the point where I was comfortable kind of jumping and publishing, and it got out there. I independently published, and it became a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I was shocked. I was really surprised by it. It's never going to replace my day job being a writer, but I might write another book. But I would love to have your listeners take a read of it. Please feel free to review it. Whatever you say is fine on Amazon or any other platform. But I think, the purpose was really kind of almost philanthropic to write the book. So
that's awesome. I definitely think that, I've throughout my career, I've helped a lot of people that have lost loved ones suddenly. And I think that your advice about the therapy, the people that I've seen that have done the therapy and have talked to somebody about what's going on has definitely helped them, and they have definitely recovered a lot faster.
Yeah, I think sharing, people just see, I have a friend in this business that calls it the iceberg illusion. They just see this successful person on the surface, but they don't see what's underneath. And so the book was like an attempt to share some of that with people who, are younger or my age or anywhere in life that are going through transition or loss, or just need to get inspiration around, how do I navigate this? So that's the why of it. I meet people a lot, and I get to the point where I think it's such a gift to say, hey, I wrote this book, I'm going to send it to you, that are struggling with something, talking with someone, understanding it, and having a tool, having an actual gift you can give someone is pretty neat. So
pretty powerful. We've covered a lot of things. What have I not asked you that you wish I had?
Oh gosh. I had a feeling you were going to ask that. Um, I guess, that age-old question that people ask. I've thought about this a lot. Because we have younger clients now that are business people, like, early families, young families. And I guess, what advice would I give to myself back then now that I now know? And I think it is to just like live in the present
Mhm.
more than it doesn't mean we shouldn't plan. Of course we should plan, but there's this old saying, I think it's a Yiddish saying, man plans, God laughs. So, your plans, you should plan, because if you don't have a plan, it's hope, which,
Right.
but also just being present with, your family, with your friends. It's the most important thing. And when your kids are small, it goes by in a blink, so just spending the time and finding that balance that I alluded to earlier, I guess, is what I would reinforce to anybody. And one of the most important things as we get older is your circle, your family and your circle of friends, and just investing in them. Time's the most important thing we have. So
Totally agree. Lori, if people like what they hear, how can they reach out to you?
There's a Van Dusen book. You can go to my LinkedIn page and kind of see everything. I'm happy to accept invites, and LVW Advisors. We have a website. There's all kinds of contact information on there. They can reach out to me directly on the website or to anybody. That's probably the easiest way, or LinkedIn.
Great. Really appreciate your time today and enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Gary.
Sure. Hey, this week my guest was Lori Van Dusen, and she's the founder of LVW Advisors, and I'll see you guys next week.